So a demon-like figure shows up to your bachelor party.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Oh, I love it.
And I didn't know what to do. I was literally frozen when I saw that.
Yeah?
Yeah. I didn't know what it was.
Welcome to Beyond the Pulpit, conversations we're having at Woodlands Church through a biblical lens. I'm Matt, and each episode, Shane and I talk openly about questions and stories and challenges that shape real life. Our goal is simple: to help you think deeply about Scripture, see how it connects to everyday life and experiences, and engage in the world around you with wisdom and faithfulness. So today, Shane, we're stepping into a conversation that has puzzled Christians over the past few years in our modern world. How do we navigate these increasingly dark traditions that have arisen in our culture? Specifically, today we want to address an old tradition that's getting more and more attention right now called Krampus, or Krampus walk, or something like that. If you've never heard of Krampus before, you should know that the tradition originated in the Alpine regions of Europe. That's like Austria and Germany, long time ago. Krampus is this horned goat-like figure, really a demon who punishes the misbehaving children in December. And so some claim that the tradition started long before Christianity. I think those claims are actually true. I think it is a pre-Christian idea here. But then right around the 12th century, it got adopted into some Christian ideas with it. And so one of the things that happened is that Krampus would come during the night on December the 5th, and then St. Nicholas would come on December the 6th. And so the bad children would get punished on the 5th, and then the good children would get gifts on the 6th, which is very similar to some of our traditions that we still have to this day. You know, you talk about getting a lump of coal in your stocking versus like a present from Santa or something like that. And we've just kind of combined some of these things here. However, here's the thing with this one, is that Krampus has grown in popularity over the past decade to some exceedingly high levels. Today, in fact, most major cities have Krampus walks. Even our small little mountain community has a Krampus walk as well. So due to the demon-like characteristics of Krampus and the probable pagan origins, this trend has raised some real questions among Christians as we try to interact with culture. Should a professing believer participate? Are there ways for believers to participate? Should the tradition be outright rejected? Can it be redeemed into some kind of Christian version like it was attempted to in the 12th century? How should we engage, of course, with a culture and a community that is increasingly drawn to darker and seemingly occult traditions? This is where we're headed today. Let's jump in. So Shane, had you ever heard much about Krampus before we started doing this podcast?
Well, my first question, Matt, is he pronounced Krampus or Krampus?
That's a good point. You know, I guess it has German origin. So yeah, it would be Krampus, wouldn't it?
I think it would be Krampus.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to be so honest with you about the first time that I heard about Krampus. Okay, Are you ready?
Yeah.
So I remember the first time that I learned about Krampus was actually on my bachelor party. And you want to know how? I went to Crestline Cafe in our mountain town right around the time that they were doing what'd you call it, the Krampus knot?
Krampus walk or Krampus knock.
Krampus knot, which is the Krampus walk. And I'm sitting with my good friends from my bachelor party. And as I'm sitting in Crestline Cafe, I see somebody walk in a complete decked out costume with horns, dressed in all black. I think they even had fangs. Yeah. And they sat down at the booth right across from me. And my first thought was, what is going on right now? Right? Like, what is happening? And so I later on found out through our Facebook group, actually, that they were doing the Krampus walk in town during that time. So I did a deep dive and then found out all the information that you already listed. But yeah, that was my first experience, was actually seeing somebody dressed up as Krampus right in front of me.
So a demon-like figure shows up to your bachelor party.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Oh, I love it.
I didn't know what to do. I was literally frozen when I saw that. Yeah. I didn't know what it was.
Oh man. Well, that's crazy. So you obviously did some deep dive here. Now, regardless of how familiar a person is with Krampus, we all need to evaluate the way to engage these kinds of cultural traditions in a very biblical way, of course. And so I was wondering, in this conversation that we're having here, you know, we're looking to build discernment.
Right.
And so what from Scripture do we have that really would lead to maybe the rejection of this or the adoption of it or something like that? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Scripture is really clear about the things that we should be rejecting, the things of the world, right? I think, and you're probably going to speak more about this as well, but like one of those rejections that we see is actually in 2 Corinthians 6:14, right?
Yeah.
And I'll even read it since you have it on the screen. Do not be yoked together with unbelievers, right? And so, as Christians, we're called to be different in this world. We're not supposed to align in the patterns of this world. And if the patterns of this world result in dressing up as a demon-like figure, I would say that Scripture is really clear on us rejecting that and being different from the cultural norm. What would you say?
Well, yeah, I think there's definitely many times, in fact, when we do have to reject it. Scripture calls us to reject things, and just even generally speaking, that the reason that is in Scripture, of course, is Paul is calling in that case, the Corinthians, to reject something about their culture.
Right.
Another one I think comes up in Ephesians chapter 5. It says, "Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them."
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. And so there's definitely times in Scripture where we are called to reject dark things,
right.
Pagan things, and the things that are just overtly unchristian. I mean, the very first commandment, right, is you shall have no other gods before me.
Right, exactly.
I mean, that in itself entails a rejection of literally everything else that was happening in the spiritual world of the time of Moses, and it extends to our time as well.
Right.
Yeah, and so, Christians are called to say no when certain things are just not good.
Exactly.
And we don't participate in them as well. I always thought Acts 19 was a really good example of this. Because we in our world today, we have this tendency when we reject things to like want to boycott them, or we think of cancel culture and we
show up with signs saying, do not do this. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And we're like out there protesting, right?
Yes, exactly.
But I don't think that's what Scripture really lends itself to when we're talking about rejecting certain things.
Right.
And Acts 19 is a great example of this. Here Paul's in Ephesus at this point, which he's actually in Ephesus for quite a while. And people are coming to Christ. They're becoming disciples. And what they're doing is while they're coming to Christ, they're rejecting the goddess Artemis.
Yes.
And so in doing so, then they don't go into the marketplace and buy these silver shrines of Artemis anymore for their house. What it does then is it causes an economic disturbance in the town. And the blacksmith, he gets kind of angry about it because, his business is down, and he causes a riot.
Right. But it actually almost ends up taking Paul's life because of that riot.
It's right. Yeah. They literally drag him into like the forum and almost kill him. But then like people are like, hey, wait, if we actually kill this guy, the actual Roman government is going to be actually pretty angry with us. And some friends drag him out and essentially save his life.
Right.
But in the rejection of it, it wasn't that they went out and protested Artemis. They had a temple to Artemis. They didn't go to the temple of Artemis and form a blockade or glue their hands to the temple floor or something like that so that no one could do what they needed to do.
Right.
They just stopped doing it.
Yeah.
And instead they worshiped the one true God. And so in rejecting Artemis, which was a false god, they clung to Christ in that way. And so I think that's a good example in Scripture that we see of clear rejection that isn't necessarily this confrontational thing. It is a let's come together on our own accord. In our own community and rebuild exactly what we're doing here. So now the other side of this, though, and I think this is what was happening in the 12th century, is people were, I think, trying to redeem this tradition here, connecting it to Saint Nicholas. And we still have a little bit of that tradition today where, Santa will bring you a lump of coal if you're not good and things like that, or even, I mean, to some degree, Elf on the Shelf, right?
Elf is always watching.
The elf is always watching. Yeah. I mean, like that's the whole thing with Santa, right? He knows when you're asleep. He knows when you're awake.
Yeah.
He knows when if you've been bad or good. So be good for goodness sake.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so we still use some of this traditional stuff here. We just don't do it. We kind of took the demon out of it necessarily. Right. But there might be some ways that as Christians, we could redeem things like this. Now, I'm not saying that's the absolute way of doing it, but I'm saying that there's times when we do redeem cultural elements.
Yes. Yes.
In Scripture, one of the things we do have is that there's a cultural mandate in creation, since we are made in as God's image bearers, to fill the earth and subdue it. This implies stewardship over the cultural expressions, the art, the music, the story that we tell throughout culture. And I mean, now we are such a story-based culture anyways, in the sense that we show movies and have audiobooks. I mean, movies and TV are just like so prevalent, right? And so we have times where we might want to redeem some of these things.
Yes.
And so I'm curious, sometimes we still like stories that have dark elements to it. Are they ever able to be used to bring out good things?
I mean, I would say so. I think that essentially, when you think about Halloween or you think about other traditions, there's a lot of neutral things that come with those traditions, right? Like essentially, with Halloween, you pass out candy. Is passing out candy a evil thing to do? Just because the holiday was originally dressing up in costumes and celebrating the dead, right? I don't think that passing out Halloween is an evil, or passing out candy at Halloween is an evil thing to do. It's become, we've as a culture have found a way to turn it into a neutral thing that actually promotes celebrating family time, right? Spending close time together with your family and friends, passing out candy, saying hi to the neighbors. It's become something that we've been able to make more neutral instead of carrying all of the evilness that might have came with it originally, right? So I do think that as Christians, we can find ways to take traditions that were intended for evil and turn it into something that's good.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, because the mere mention of or use of dark characters in like a story, for example, evil, even for that matter, isn't necessarily a compromise of our conscience.
Right.
I can think of a lot of stories that are very Christian oriented, and yet they have a dark side to them. I mean, Lord of the Rings is one of those very clear ones. It probably has one of the darkest characters of all, right?
Matt, you love Lord of the Rings.
Have you read it yet?
I have not read it yet. I know you're going to be mad at me. Don't be mad at me.
Hey, I just found out today, though, they're re-releasing Fellowship of the Rings in theaters in January. And the extended version, too. So we get the full story here.
Wow.
Yeah. So you got to read it before then.
Okay, I have to.
It's a very powerful Christian story, in fact. And it really does point to the gospel. But of course, there is evil present in the story. Ultimately, the story, though, is that triumph of good over evil.
Right.
We like that in stories. We like that in movies. Another interesting one, maybe even more Christian, overtly Christian than Lord of the Rings, is the Christmas Carol.
That's a really good example.
Charles Dickens, right?
Yeah.
And what does he use? He uses ghosts. We don't believe in ghosts in that way, right?
No.
And so what we're talking about is this very dark thing, and yet just because it has this dark element to it doesn't necessarily make it
inherently evil.
Exactly. Right. And something that we have to reject.
Yes.
And yet, I think Dickens, you would say he redeemed the story with it.
Yeah. I mean, since we're already going down the nerd cycle, we can even bring Star Wars into this, right?
There you go.
It's like even this idea with Anakin Skywalker becoming Darth Vader. We shouldn't reject that story just because the main character became somebody that was seen as evil, because we see that at the end of his story, he reclaims goodness at the end of it, right? So what the story intended to show was a character who started off neutral, became somewhat good, then ended up becoming evil, and then ended off with good. It's always this conflict between evil versus good, darkness versus light. And so to say that we reject Star Wars because there's a glimpse of evil in it, I think would be dumb, right? Because why would we do that when the story is obviously pointing to the same thing that Scripture does? Scripture points to this idea of good versus evil, darkness versus light. And so it doesn't necessarily matter how the story gets there, but the main point is that there's always going to be some form of darkness versus light. And just because darkness is in it doesn't mean that we should reject it.
Right, right. Now, I think there's one caveat to that I just want to mention here too, is that we don't live in a dualist system here. It's not that good only exists as the opposite of evil,
Right.
which I think is kind of the Star Wars element of that. Like there's the balance of the Force.
The balance, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
yes.
and that's not a Christian idea ultimately.
No.
And I think Lucas and whoever else would agree that that's definitely not a Christian idea.
Yeah.
Evil ultimately someday will not exist.
Exactly.
In eternity, God redeems things and brings everything under His power and authority, and everything will then actually be good. And so I think sometimes with what I've read about Krampus is that what we're reminded of in this is that there are these dark things that we want to have some balance with. I've read these on some pagan websites, basically. And
you read pagan websites, Matt?
I was doing research. I was really doing research. It's for the audience.
Okay.
So,
for you guys.
That's right. Yeah, and so there's definitely times when believers are encouraged to engage with culture in redemptive ways. And, we want to have culture, and we do have culture in all things. I mean, in our church, we are definitely an American church.
Yes.
Everything from the way our music works to even just the way we work with each other is actually very American, as opposed to maybe what you would experience in Africa or Latin America and places like that.
Right.
And so there's definitely things that we can redeem in culture and not necessarily just outright reject.
Exactly.
Now, there's another option here, though, too, that I think we see in Scripture here, and that I would call this a bridge to the gospel. And so it's a cultural element that can serve as a point of contrast, and then it points back to Christ. And some people would call this a gospel foil. And so, you got married more recently than me, and so you went to the jeweler and you picked out the ring, and they probably showed it to you, or at least maybe even you picked out the diamond, right?
Exactly.
And they put it on black velvet, right?
Yes.
Now, the whole point of that was to show how brilliant Carla's ring was.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, and how beautiful it was.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that foil is that contrast, right?
Contrast, exactly.
And so if you can show something that against this contrast, then you can show how good the gospel is. We see this in Acts 17. Paul, he walks into Athens and he's actually gets kind of emotional because he's walking through and there's just all these idols to this god and that god and this god and that god. And then he goes to the place where all the philosophers philosophize, and he stands up in front of them, which was actually a very normal thing to do, especially as a visitor, someone who was learned. And he gets up there and he basically says, "You have an altar to an unknown God. Let me tell you what you don't know."
Yeah. Let me tell you who this God is meant to be.
Exactly. Yeah. And so he uses that as a foil, like
right.
that contrast, that bridge to the gospel, that then will bring about good things for the gospel, and ultimately the rejection of false worship in that case. And so there's now in our culture we have an overall increase in dark themes in our culture. Just as an example, horror movies are a big thing nowadays.
Yeah.
And they've actually more than the amount of horror movies being made has more than doubled in 15 years.
Wow.
Okay?
That's a really interesting statistic.
So, yeah, I did some more research on this too, as you probably expect I would.
Yeah, of course.
So in 1970, there were 100 horror films produced.
Okay.
That's not very many. And there were probably really, really bad ones too. If you think back to some of those really old ones before you were even born, like The Blob and The Thing.
And seeing just ketchup everywhere, and you can tell that it's ketchup.
It's so true, right? Yeah. Well, now there are actually more than 1,500 horror films produced annually.
Wow.
Yes, something has happened in our culture that we have been more and more drawn to horror, to the dark side of life, and so I think it's important to note that Paul doesn't participate in these polytheistic practices in Athens. Even though he uses them as that bridge here. And so, horror films, maybe they have a place. I don't know. But at the very least, they can land as that contrast to what is good and true in the gospel. So Shane, I think there are some obvious times when believers need to be just black and white in certain things. Satan worship or any other god should be completely rejected, as an example, of course. course.
Yeah.
But one might argue that many Christians have adopted traditional practices without much thought. Halloween does come to mind.
Yeah.
Easter eggs, or even just calling it Easter, and as opposed to like Resurrection
Day.
That's another example, because Easter, as if you do the research, it has some pagan origins.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of Christians have tried to reclaim Resurrection Day and say Happy Resurrection Day instead of Easter, right? So I think that there's even this idea of confusion even within the Christian community. They don't know whether to accept things or not, right?
Right. Yeah, because ultimately we have to be living in our culture.
Exactly.
Like there's just American things I do, and there's things that I adopt. Culture oftentimes is those things that are not thought about.
Yes.
I won't give an example right now, but here, I want to make sure that we're being fair, because we ultimately are cultural people.
Right.
And so are we being unfair to Krampus, or egg hunts, or you mentioned handing out candy at Halloween, or many, many other things. I mean, even just the Santa idea, right? Mm-hmm. Like you could say, this is not in Scripture, it should be utterly rejected. Or is there room to exercise discernment as we live in culture? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing Christians need to keep in mind is that our posture toward cultural traditions shouldn't be driven by fear, but rather by discernment, right? Similar to what you said. And Scripture doesn't call us to hide from everything in the world. It calls us to test everything and to hold on to what is good. So the question isn't, is this spooky? The question is, does this practice reflect the character of God, or does it distort it? When we talk about Krampus, we're dealing with more than just another festive tradition with a funny costume. Krampus has historically been understood as a demonic, punitive creature, a being who beats or torments children and operates as a dark counterpart to Saint Nicholas. And I don't know if you've seen this movie yet, Matt. There's a movie called Red One.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's with J.K. Simmons and The Rock.
Does it have Frodo?
I don't know.
No, it doesn't have Frodo, does it?
I don't think so.
It's not Lord of the Rings, so why would I watch it?
You see, this guy's addicted to Lord of the Rings. So in Red One, Krampus is actually in it. Krampus is that meme that I actually texted you the other day was from that movie Red One. Uh-huh. And so the way that Red One portrays Krampus is as Saint Nicholas's brother. Which I think is really interesting. And so the imagery surrounding Krampus is just built on fear and bondage, and this idea that evil plays a necessary balancing role in the moral order. That worldview is very different from the biblical one. Now, some people will ask, well, aren't Christians already participating in things like Halloween or Easter eggs without thinking about where these things came from? Are we being inconsistent? And that's a fair question. But the key distinction is this. Many of those practices have gone through such heavy cultural secularization that they no longer carry explicit spiritual meaning. For most families, Easter eggs don't symbolize pagan fertility rituals anymore. They're just colorful eggs that kids enjoy hunting after, right? Like if you see churches that put out Easter egg hunts and things like that, do you think that the first thing going through a kid's mind is, I am practicing a pagan way of worship right now, right?
Right.
I don't think that most people are doing that. Maybe that goes back to what you said, that the culture has become so normal that people just don't even question things anymore. Right.
Yeah.
And Halloween candy isn't a ritual act. It's just simply participating in neighborhood fun. The Apostle Paul actually addresses this principle when he talks about meat sacrificed to idols. If the spiritual meaning has been culturally emptied, and if your participation doesn't violate your conscience or witness, then the practice can become morally neutral. And I think that's where we want to land, right? Like, what do we accept and what do we reject as Christians? Well, has that tradition became neutral? If it hasn't, then maybe that's something that we should look into stepping away from. But if it's something that has became neutral, then maybe we don't have to make as much of a big deal as people might want to make out of it, right? However, I'm sorry to Krampus. I'm going to have to say Krampus is different. The meaning hasn't neutralized. In fact, modern Krampus celebrations intentionally lean into dark imagery. The appeal of Krampus today is precisely that he is demonic, monstrous, and fear-inducing. So we're not just talking about a harmless symbol, we're talking about an aesthetic that celebrates fear, humiliation, and the delight of evil. Things Scripture tells us to expose and not embrace. And beyond the theological questions, there's also the pastoral concern, right?
Yeah.
Christian ethics isn't only about avoiding idol worship, it's about asking, what does this form in me? What kind of imagination does this cultivate in my heart? Krampus, even when presented humorously, still normalizes a relationship with evil that Scripture consistently warns against. It mixes Christian tradition, Saint Nicholas, generosity, celebration of Christ's coming, with a creature who literally embodies terror and malice. And Paul is very clear in 2 Corinthians that we don't blend light and darkness and call it a holiday tradition, right? So at the end of the day, this isn't about being uptight or unfun. It's simply about recognizing that not every tradition enriches the Christian imagination. And some things are safe to enjoy because their meanings have shifted. Other things, like Krampus, still carry a message that pulls us away from the gospel rather than toward it. Or to say it simply, eggs and candy have become neutral. Krampus hasn't, and Christians should be thoughtful about the stories and symbols we celebrate, especially when they revolve around darkness rather than Christ.
Well said.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's a level to which we say, in something like Krampus is not neutral, and in fact it's a deliberate attempt to cross the line in going towards paganism.
Exactly.
And especially, I mean, part of it is that this is not just some tradition that has still been practiced for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. This has been a meteoric rise in the past 10 years.
Exactly.
And so why did it get brought back? Well, it wasn't to somehow increase cultural literacy or something like that. It was to bring back things that were deliberately not Christian. Right. And so when you do the reading on this, when you look at these festivals, they actually are not connected to St. Nicholas Day on the 6th. They are connected. They're not connected to anything on that one. If anything, they're connected more to pagan ideas of the seasons. Things like the winter solstice,
exactly.
Which I mean, that's a scientific thing that we talk about. Like we literally have the darkest day of the year in terms of the number of hours of sunlight and things like that, at least in the northern hemisphere. But and so there's all these pagan rituals connected with that they're connecting Krampus to.
Yes.
And so there's definitely a need to say this is something we should not participate in right now. Now, I think there's. I guess on the other side of this too, like listening to what you say, could Krampus become, you might say, sanitized enough for Christians, like Halloween?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily know if it can. I mean, when you really do think about ancient times and you think about the ancient gods and what they were doing back then and what they symbolized, like what's an ancient god that comes to your mind that closely correlates to Krampus? Mine is Baal. Right. It's like this idea of sacrificing children, eating children, anything in regard to punishing children. It originates from a lot of these ancient gods that were seen in Scripture to reject, that are used to correct the community and tell the ancient Israelites, like, no, do not follow in these ways. These ways are not of Yahweh. Mm-hmm. And so to say that we can take this idea of Krampus and almost turn Krampus into a Santa, I just can't see that happening, because to the root of Krampus's character, it's solely on punishment and fear and inflicting fear. And when we look at the character of God, our God is not a God who instills fear within his creation, right? Like fear does not come from God. And so can we turn Krampus into Santa? I honestly don't think so. But what do you think? Well,
I think ultimately we regardless of how we deal with something like this, we have to let Scripture be our guide.
Right.
And so I think there's 3 principles that come out of Scripture. First of all, it is do what is clear in Scripture. And there are many things that are very, very clear in Scripture. This, I think, is actually probably one of them. is that we don't participate in pagan rituals, those types of things. And people might argue saying, well, no, it's just a holiday tradition. It's just a European tradition. It's even part of my culture or something like that.
Right.
And so I can see where that's there, but at the same time, you have to think a little deeper with it. I think honestly, some of that has to be dealt with when it does come to Halloween as well.
Yes.
Halloween has some of the same flavor as I think the 12th century, Krampus night and then St. Nicholas Day happened, because you have October 31st, which was the Day of the Dead, more or less, and then it was All Hallows Eve, and so it was supposed to be about dead people and the saints and things like that. And then you have November 1st, which was All Saints Day, and so it was a church feast, and so there was an attempt to redeem that one as well. And so we're working in some of the same fashions with it.
Yes.
Now, again, I'm not saying we completely reject everything we do with Halloween, because some of it you dress up as Iron Man and you go get candy with your kid, and I mean that's good. You talk to your neighbors, right? Or like I know several people who set up their fire pit in their driveway, and they welcome neighbors onto their property and talk to them. It's a great time.
Yeah.
Churches, even for that matter, have like harvest festivals or just even call it Halloween,
Yeah.
And they participate in things like that. And so there's a level of to which it has been redeemed to that degree. And so to say that I don't think that Krampus could never be completely sanitized, but at the same time, right now, it probably is not a good thing to participate in. And so we got to do what is clear in Scripture. And when it has this pagan origin, we have to be pretty careful on this one. We have to know Scripture in order to know what to do, right?
Right. Exactly.
A third principle I think that really comes up in Scripture, and you kind of brought up the passage about meat sacrificed to idols, but it's really not violating one's conscience.
Yes.
And so, like, if you don't if you don't feel comfortable celebrating Halloween, it's okay. Don't celebrate Halloween. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Krampus. If this is something that's really bothering you, stay away.
Yes.
You don't have to go. It's not like you have to go hold a sign out there, but at the same time, you don't have to participate.
Well, to even take it a step further, we can even use that same logic applied to Santa, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like, I feel like even as Christians, we can say that a lot of people have taken Santa a little bit too far as well, mm-hmm. right? Like, I was actually watching Home Alone with Carla, and one of the kids in Home Alone said something about Santa that kind of like made me take a step back for a second. Yeah. They said, well, isn't Santa omniscient? And I'm like, wow, that is a biblical term used for describing God's essence, right?
Yeah.
And so if we start getting too close to correlating Santa to God, then I think we need to also take a step back and say, maybe, just maybe, we might have to cool it off on Santa just a little bit, right? But at the same time, Santa's not irredeemable. Mm-hmm. And so I would say that that's the difference between Santa and Krampus.
Sure. Yeah. I think a third principle that we get here, because honestly, like even Halloween, just as an example, has caused division amongst Christians. Mm-hmm. There's those who do, those who don't, right? And so we have to allow for Christian freedom on this.
Yes.
And so if I think with these three principles, that's how we walk forward in evaluating these things.
Right.
Now, personally, this is where I think it is that Krampus lands on the side of being clear in Scripture. There's a black and whiteness here in terms of its even current pagan celebrations of it. And so, we can't do that.
Right.
The Bible is clear on that one. And so we don't have to worry about, well, does this violate someone's conscience or my conscience? No, this is what Scripture says.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Final thoughts, Shane. Is Krampus rejected, redeemable, or is it a bridge to the gospel?
Well, I feel like I can answer that in two ways. I would say that Krampus can be rejected, and we can also try to find a way to bridge Krampus to the gospel, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason why I say that is because if you know somebody who wants to participate in this Krampus parade, let's talk about it, right? Like use that as an opportunity to bring the gospel to them, right? Like how does the gospel change our minds? How does the gospel form our minds to view things of this world that aren't according to how God intended it to be, right? And I think in the same way, evil does point to good, right? And we see that all the time within Scripture. This horn-like figure that Krampus is, and what he symbolizes can easily be refuted by the gospel. And so I do think that we can find a way to bridge Krampus and the gospel together, and to create a conversation about it, at least, right? To talk to your friends, to talk to your family members that might be okay with celebrating Krampus. I think it's a good opportunity to talk about the gospel. What about you, Matt?
Love your neighbor. I think that's great.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's something we probably should reject, and probably it can be a bridge to the gospel. I agree. Is it redeemable? Not immediately.
No, not yet.
No. Again, this is part of what I think culture does. Is These things have to take place over long time.
Yeah, but like you said, the idea of Krampus is pretty ancient, right? It
is. Yeah.
And if Krampus is an ancient tradition, and we're here now in the 21st century still rejecting Krampus,
yes,
I can't see him making a comeback from this one.
Well, thanks so much for spending time with us today. We hope that you enjoyed this conversation and it helped you think more clearly and biblically about the world around you. If you did find this helpful, give us a like, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and share this video with everybody. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment below about how this conversation helped you think about engaging with our culture. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.